Walked back into the office after a routine work trip expecting a normal Monday. Instead, every desk was gone, computers removed, personal items erased. My entire team had been stripped from our workspace and relocated out of sight to make room for a so-called golden hire. No warning, no discussion. Just a quiet decision made while I was away. That moment made one thing painfully clear. Loyalty meant nothing when image was on the line. What happened next wasn't emotional. It was calculated, and it changed everything for everyone involved. If you've ever been pushed aside at work, stay with me. Subscribe for stories like this, and tell me in the comments if something similar ever happened to you. Returned to the office after a short work trip expecting nothing more than a routine catch-up. But the moment the elevator doors opened, something was wrong. The floor was quiet in a way it never was. No keyboards, no low conversations, no familiar movement. I walked straight to our section and stopped cold. Every desk was gone, screens removed, chairs missing. Even the plants we kept alive under fluorescent lights were gone, leaving pale rectangles in the carpet where they'd been. I said out loud, "Where is my team?" Before I realized no one was there to answer, a woman from accounting slowed as she passed and wouldn't meet my eyes. "You should check downstairs," she said, already walking away. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have. When the doors opened, I followed temporary signs taped to concrete walls until I reached a storage area barely converted into a workspace. Folding tables, exposed pipes, extension cords stretched across the floor. My team sat hunched together, monitors balanced like afterthoughts, trying to work as if this were normal. Water dripped into a plastic bucket beside one desk. Someone whispered my name. "They came yesterday," Lena said quietly. "They said we had 30 minutes. I asked who they were, even though I already knew. "Marcus," she answered, "with movers." I stood there taking in the smell of dust and damp concrete, the humiliation settling in before the anger did. I walked back upstairs without saying another word. Our old space was unrecognizable, sunlight through the windows, clean desks, and in the center, a man I didn't recognize arranging framed certificates on what used to be my desk. Marcus hovered beside him, smiling like a proud parent. "There you are," Marcus said brightly when he saw me. "Perfect timing, meet Cole, our new performance transformation specialist." Cole didn't look up. Marcus continued, lowering his voice like he was sharing a favor. "He needs an environment that supports innovation. Your team can manage downstairs for now." I asked, "You moved my entire team without telling me?" He didn't hesitate. It was necessary. That was it. No apology. No explanation beyond that single word. People nearby pretended not to listen, which somehow made it worse. I nodded once because there was nothing to argue anymore. The decision had already been executed. When I returned to the basement, everyone looked up at me, searching my face for reassurance I couldn't give them. "Pack everything," I said. Ron frowned. "We just unpacked." "I know," I replied. "Pack anyway." No speech, no comfort, just instructions. The humiliation wasn't just the basement, it was the message. Our work could be displaced without a conversation, our dignity traded for someone else's image. Later that afternoon, Marcus sent a calendar invite announcing Cole's introductory presentation to senior leadership. Mandatory attendance. My team sat in the back while Cole spoke about optimization and vision, clicking through slides filled with promises and percentages. When questions came, his answers stayed vague. Marcus jumped in to fill the gaps, glancing at us like we were obstacles instead of proof. At one point, someone asked where the core systems team was based. Marcus gestured vaguely. "They're handling implementation elsewhere." I felt every eye flick toward us and then away. That was the moment the line was crossed publicly. We weren't just moved, we were erased. After the meeting, Marcus stopped me in the hallway. "Let's not make this emotional," he said, hand already on his phone. "This is about progress." I looked at him and said, "You made it emotional when you decided we belonged underground." He didn't respond. That night, back in the basement, I watched my team work in silence under flickering lights, and I understood something clearly for the first time. Nothing we said would undo what had already been done. The humiliation was complete, documented, and shared. From that moment on, every step I took wasn't about fixing the situation. It was about responding to it. The next morning, I arrived early and found everyone already there, working without being asked. No one complained, no one joked. The basement had done its job. It made people careful. I walked the room once, slow enough to be noticed, then said, "We work as usual. No shortcuts, no commentary." Ava looked up and asked, "Are we filing a complaint?" I shook my head. Not yet. That was all I gave them. By mid-morning, Marcus sent an email thanking the department for its flexibility during a period of transition. He CC'd senior leadership, no mention of the conditions, no acknowledgement of disruption. I forwarded the email to a private folder and labeled it simply Records. From that point on, everything became a record. I asked Eli to export project timelines. I asked Priya to duplicate system access logs. I asked Mara to begin writing step-by-step process notes for tasks she normally handled from memory. When she asked why, I said, "So nothing we've built disappears." That answer seemed to settle her. We kept our heads down. When Cole walked through the basement with Marcus later that day, neither of them stayed long. Cole glanced at the ceiling pipes and said, "Temporary solutions always look messy at first." Marcus laughed too quickly. I didn't say a word. Instead, I made a note of the date and who was present. By the afternoon, the Wi-Fi cut out twice. Ron reset the router both times without comment. When a leak started near the back wall, someone moved the equipment before asking permission. No panic, just adaptation. That night, I sent one message from my personal phone to a contact I hadn't spoken to in years. It was short and neutral. "Checking in. Would like to reconnect when you have time." I didn't wait for a response. The next day, Cole's calendar filled the executive floor. Workshops, strategy sessions, brainstorming meetings. None of my team was invited. Marcus stopped by once, standing just far enough inside the doorway to avoid the drip. "We'll need your team ready to support implementation," he said. "Document whatever you think is necessary." I looked at him and replied, "Already doing that." He nodded, satisfied, and left. He had no idea what that documentation would mean later. By the end of the week, everyone understood the new rhythm. Work, document, duplicate, store. Conversation stayed practical. Where does this feed into? Who else has access? What happens if this fails? We weren't preparing to fight. We were preparing to function without permission. On Friday, Marcus announced a review meeting scheduled for the following week. 1 hour, senior leadership present. Cole would present progress. My team would attend. "Just listen," he said, smiling like this was generous. I thanked him and marked the meeting time in my calendar. That night, I stayed late after everyone else left. I walked the basement one last time, listening to the hum of machines above us, and checked that every shared folder had a duplicate location. When I shut down my computer, my phone buzzed. A reply to the message I'd sent days earlier. "Good timing, let's talk." I didn't smile. I just replied, "Yes." The review meeting took place the following Tuesday and lasted exactly 47 minutes, which told me everything before it even began. I sat with my team along the back wall while Marcus stood near the screen, hand resting on Cole's shoulder like an endorsement. Cole opened with confidence, clicking through slides filled with clean arrows and bold percentages. "What we're introducing," he said, "isn't a tweak, it's a reset." A vice president asked how the reset interacted with existing systems. Cole smiled and said, "Legacy frameworks adapt once you remove friction." Marcus nodded quickly, stepping in before the question could deepen. "Our teams are aligned," he said, gesturing vaguely in our direction. "Implementation is already underway." No one asked us anything. Cole continued describing efficiency gains that hadn't happened yet as if they were already measured. When a director asked about downtime risk, Cole replied, "We don't anticipate resistance once the vision is clear." I watched the room shift slightly, the way it does when people sense confidence without substance but don't yet have language for it. Marcus filled the silence with enthusiasm, repeating phrases like velocity and forward momentum. At one point, a board observer asked where Cole had deployed a similar model before. Cole listed 2 companies and quoted dramatic improvements. I noticed Marcus didn't look at him when he said the numbers. He looked at the slide instead. The meeting ended with polite applause and a promise to reconvene in 30 days. As people stood to leave, Marcus turned and said, "Good job, everyone," then added, "Especially you, Cole." In the hallway outside, a senior manager paused near me and said quietly, "Interesting approach." I nodded and said nothing. Back in the basement, my team didn't ask how it went. They didn't need to. The silence did enough talking. Later that afternoon, an email went out summarizing the meeting. It praised innovation and vision. It mentioned alignment. It didn't mention us. I forwarded it to records. By the end of the day, a client escalated a question about delayed deliverables. The issue traced back to a dependency Cole had recommended deprioritizing. Marcus replied, copying leadership, "We're adjusting in real time." I watched the thread without entering it. That evening, Cole came down to the basement alone. He stood near the doorway, careful not to step too far in. "I'll need a rundown of your systems," he said. "High level." I asked, "For what purpose?" He hesitated. "So I can streamline." I said, "Send a request, we'll review." He didn't like that answer. He left without arguing. The next day, Marcus sent a message asking for documentation by end of week. I replied with a single line. "Confirmed, no qualifiers." By Friday, Cole's confidence had become louder. He spoke more, answered faster, interrupted questions with jokes. People laughed politely. The cracks weren't visible yet, but the pressure was building. During a short check-in, Marcus said, "I need you flexible." I said, "We are." He smiled, assuming agreement. What he didn't see was the way my team had started to anticipate questions before they were asked, preparing answers no one had requested yet. That afternoon, I received a call from an external partner asking if changes were being made without notice. I said, "Nothing official." It was true. Later that night, I reviewed the week's notes and marked 3 items for follow-up. Not issues, opportunities. The stage had been set. Cole was visible. Marcus was invested. And for the first time since the basement move, the attention wasn't on where we worked, but on whether the promises being made could survive contact with reality. The shift happened quietly, the way real problems usually do, without announcements or raised voices. On Monday morning, Marcus forwarded a message from a long-standing client asking for clarification on revised delivery timelines. The tone was polite but precise. I recognized it immediately as concern, not curiosity. I replied with facts only, no commentary, and copied no one beyond the original thread. An hour later, Marcus appeared in the basement, this time stepping fully inside. "We're seeing some friction," he said, hands in his pockets. "Nothing serious." I nodded and asked, "Which workflow?" He hesitated before answering, naming a process Cole had restructured on paper but not tested in practice. "We flagged that dependency," I said. "It was deprioritized," he replied quickly, as if that settled it. By midweek, friction had a name. 2 milestones slipped. A vendor asked for written confirmation of changes they'd only heard about informally. Marcus started scheduling short calls instead of sending emails. Cole attended fewer meetings, sending slides in advance instead. In one check-in, a director asked whether existing safeguards were still active. Cole answered, "They're being optimized." I watched the director write that down and underline it. That afternoon, Marcus asked me to join a private call. "We may need your team to stabilize a few areas," he said, "just temporarily." I asked, "Are we being brought back into planning?" He paused, then said, "Execution first." I told him we'd support existing commitments. He thanked me and ended the call quickly. Back in the basement, I told the team to continue exactly as they were. No one argued. By Thursday, the tone upstairs had changed. Emails were shorter. Fewer people were copied. Cole stopped using percentages and started saying directionally positive. A senior manager stopped me near the elevators and said, "We may have moved too fast." I replied, "That happens. Nothing more." That evening, Marcus sent an update announcing that the team might be relocated to a different floor pending space review. No timeline, no details. I read it twice and closed it without responding. The offer was symbolic, not corrective. The next day, a second client escalated concerns, this time copying leadership directly. The issue wasn't failure, but inconsistency. Promises had been made that didn't match reality. Marcus replied with reassurance and asked Cole to prepare a follow-up presentation. Cole asked my team for data, this time with urgency. I told him we'd provide verified outputs only. He didn't push back. During the follow-up meeting, Cole spoke carefully, avoiding specifics. When asked how progress compared to projections, he said, "We're recalibrating expectations." Marcus looked down at his notes. After the call, he messaged me privately. "Let's talk options." I agreed to meet the IEO. Following week, over the weekend I reviewed the records we'd been collecting. Timelines, requests, deviations, nothing dramatic on its own. Taken together, they showed a pattern. On Monday morning, Marcus arrived early again. "We're considering adjustments," he said. "Maybe moving your team closer to the main floor." I asked, with authority restored? He didn't answer directly. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," he said instead. I thanked him for the update. When he left, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty. Not panic yet, but the awareness that control was slipping. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was the external contact I'd reconnected with earlier. "I'm hearing things," she said. "Tell me what's actually happening." I told her the truth briefly. She listened and said, "That explains the calls?" We agreed to speak again soon. When I hung up, I didn't feel relief or satisfaction. I felt clarity. The first cracks had formed, not because anyone was exposed, but because reality had started to resist the story being told. The leverage didn't arrive with an announcement. It surfaced the way pressure always does, through questions no one could deflect anymore. Midweek, a client requested a joint review call and asked that I attend. Marcus approved it without comment, copying Cole at the last minute. The call opened with routine pleasantries and then moved straight into specifics. "We're seeing discrepancies," the client said. "What was proposed versus what's executing?" Cole started to answer, then stopped and said, "The underlying architecture is more flexible than originally assumed." I waited. The client asked, "Flexible how?" There was a pause long enough to feel. Marcus jumped in, offering reassurance and promising a written follow-up. After the call, Marcus asked me to stay on. "I need you to explain this to them," he said. "Clearly." I replied, "We can explain what exists, not what was promised." That was the first time I saw him flinch. Later that afternoon, my external contact arrived for a scheduled walkthrough. She wasn't introduced as anything more than a former colleague. Marcus shook her hand and smiled, assuming it was a courtesy visit. Cole launched into his overview, confident again now that he was on familiar ground. She listened carefully, asked a few questions, and then said, "Which teams validated these assumptions?" Cole said, "We benchmarked industry standards." She nodded and asked, "Internally?" He looked at Marcus. Marcus said, "We're aligned." She smiled politely and said nothing else. The tour ended upstairs. As we walked back toward the elevators, she said quietly, "You should invite them to the next client review." I said, "They won't come." She said, "They will if they know I'll be there." 2 days later, that review happened. The room was fuller than usual. People who didn't normally attend had found reasons to join. Cole presented updated slides, noticeably toned down. When questions came, they were sharper. My external contact asked where certain metrics originated. Cole referenced projections. She asked to see validation. I shared a summary prepared by my team, factual and neutral. The contrast was immediate. No accusations, just alignment versus assumption. Marcus tried to redirect, but the discussion had already shifted. By the end of the meeting, action items were reassigned. Cole was no longer the sole voice. Afterward, Marcus pulled me aside. "We need to talk," he said. "Soon," I agreed. That evening, Cole sent a request for expedited data access. I responded that all requests would be handled through formal channels. He replied with frustration. I didn't respond again. The following morning, Marcus called me into his office. We may have miscalculated, he said. I want to fix this. I asked, fix what specifically? He talked around the issue, mentioning timelines and perception. I listened and then said, this isn't a perception problem. He looked tired. What do you want? He asked. I told him we'd discuss options once all stakeholders were present. He agreed too quickly. That afternoon, the client sent a note requesting revised commitments in writing. Marcus forwarded it to Cole and copied leadership. I forwarded it to records. By Friday, Cole's calendar was suddenly empty. Marcus scheduled a leadership sync and asked me to attend. In that meeting, questions were asked that hadn't been asked before, about past results, about verification, about why the team with the most historical knowledge had been removed from the process. I answered only when addressed, calmly with documentation. No one interrupted. When the meeting ended, Marcus stayed behind. You've been preparing this, he said. I replied, we prepared to be accountable. That weekend, I met with my external contact again. We reviewed what had surfaced and what hadn't yet. She said, they're exposed now. I said, not yet. On Monday morning, Marcus sent a message requesting a full team discussion. Subject line, path forward. I read it once and accepted. The leverage was no longer quiet. It was visible, structured, and no longer mine alone to carry. The meeting Marcus requested happened the following afternoon and lasted just under an hour, which was already longer than he'd planned. He started by acknowledging that the rollout hadn't gone as smoothly as expected and that leadership was reassessing priorities. I listened without interrupting. Cole sat beside him, unusually quiet, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. Marcus shifted in his chair and said, we want to make this right. I asked, define right. He outlined a package in pieces instead of all at once, like he was testing what might land. Relocating the team to a better floor, a compensation adjustment, a formal role in implementation planning. None of it addressed authority. None of it reversed the decision that put us underground. I asked, who would we report to? He said, let's not lock that in yet. That was the answer. Cole finally spoke. This doesn't have to be adversarial, he said. We can collaborate. I replied, collaboration requires consent. He looked at Marcus. Marcus said, we're offering flexibility. I said, you're offering repair without accountability. The room went quiet. Marcus leaned forward. What would it take for you to stay? I told him I wasn't negotiating for myself. I was speaking for a team that had already been treated as movable inventory. I said, any path forward has to remove single-point control. He frowned. That's not how this company operates. I said, that's why we're here. He asked for time. I agreed to nothing. Later that day, an email went out announcing an interim adjustment to reporting lines. Temporary, vague. It was meant to signal action without committing to change. Cole's name appeared twice in the message. Mine did not. I forwarded it to records. The next morning, Marcus stopped by the basement again, this time with a printed proposal. Raises, titles, office assignments. He slid it across a folding table like it was a peace offering. This is approved, he said, effective immediately. I looked at the numbers and said, this doesn't address the structure. He said, we can revisit structure later. I handed the paper back. Later is why this happened. He exhaled sharply. You're leaving me no room, I said. You left no room when you moved us. That afternoon, Cole asked to speak privately. I declined. By then, his role had narrowed to execution of decisions he no longer controlled. That evening, my team gathered around one workstation while I summarized the offer. No reactions, just listening. Ron finally said, so they want us back where we started, but grateful. I said, they want stability without changing who decides. Ava asked, what's the alternative? I told them there were two, not one. One involved staying under a different structure. One involved leaving under terms we controlled. Silence followed, then nods. No one asked for guarantees. They asked about timing and clarity. The next day, Marcus sent a revised proposal. This time it included a reporting shift, still conditional, still reversible. He added a note, "We're trying." I replied with a single sentence. Trying would have happened before the basement. By Friday, leadership scheduled a broader review with stakeholders present. Cole was listed as optional. He did not attend. Marcus opened the meeting by stating that changes would be made effective immediately. He looked at me when he said it. I said, "Effective for whom?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he asked if we'd reconsider. I said we would proceed with the plan we'd prepared. That was the moment the balance tipped. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a shift in who was waiting on whom. When the meeting ended, Marcus asked for a few minutes alone. "This will follow me," he said. I replied, "It should." He nodded once. As I left the room, I understood something clearly. The offer wasn't late because of timing. It was late because it came from the same place as the decision that caused the damage, and by then, we no longer needed permission to move forward. The final decisions unfolded without ceremony, which felt appropriate given how casually everything had been set in motion. Leadership announced a restructuring the following Monday morning, framed as a strategic realignment rather than a correction. Marcus was reassigned to a role that no longer had direct authority over people, only processes. The announcement used neutral language, but the message was clear to anyone who had been paying attention. Cole's departure came 2 days later, explained as a mutual decision. No farewell email, no acknowledgement of his role in the transition. His calendar simply disappeared. My team watched all of this from the basement for the last time, not celebrating, not commenting, just noting outcomes. That afternoon, we were formally notified of our new status. Some of us would remain under a revised structure with clear authority boundaries. Others would transition externally under agreements already finalized. The split wasn't dramatic, it was deliberate. Each person had a path that removed dependency on a single decision maker. When I explained the final arrangement, no one asked why we weren't all staying or all leaving. They asked how to hand things over cleanly. We spent the next few days closing loops, documenting final transitions, and returning equipment that no longer belonged to us. The basement emptied slowly. On the last day, facilities came to dismantle the temporary setup. No one asked where we were going next. They didn't need to. A month later, the effects were visible in ways reports couldn't hide. Projects slowed briefly as institutional knowledge shifted. New leaders asked better questions. Fewer promises were made without verification. People who had watched quietly before began speaking up, not because the culture had transformed overnight, but because the consequences of ignoring reality had been demonstrated clearly. I didn't take a title that put me above everyone else. I took a role that put me between systems, able to move, advise, and disengage when necessary. The team stayed connected, not by proximity, but by design. No one was isolated again. Marcus and I spoke once more, briefly at a company event months later. He looked tired but composed. He said, "I underestimated how far this would go." I replied, "You underestimated how closely people watch what happens to those who deliver." He nodded and walked away. There was no satisfaction in that exchange, just confirmation. Cole resurfaced in a different context not long after, consulting elsewhere, using similar language, selling similar ideas. I didn't warn anyone. I didn't need to. The pattern was public now. As for us, the work continued differently, better aligned with reality. Bright offices replaced the basement, but more importantly, clarity replaced uncertainty. The lesson wasn't about revenge in the way people usually mean it. No one was shouted down, no scenes were made, no ultimatums were issued in anger. The outcome came from treating the situation exactly as it was, a misalignment between contribution and control. Once that was addressed, everything else followed. Looking back, the most damaging part of the original decision wasn't the physical relocation. It was the assumption behind it that experienced people would absorb disrespect quietly because they always had. That assumption didn't survive contact with preparation. If there's anything I'd want someone listening to take from this, it's simple. Pay attention to what changes when you're not in the room. Document what you build. Know where your leverage actually is, and understand that the moment you're treated as disposable is not the moment to argue. It's the moment to prepare. If you've ever found yourself sidelined for optics or replaced by someone louder but lighter, you're not alone. Share your experience if you're comfortable, and if stories like this resonate, subscribe. Not because it ends cleanly, but because it shows what happens when quiet competence stops waiting to be noticed. What this experience taught me wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, almost invisible while it was happening. Being moved into that basement didn't just take a workspace. It took certainty. It took the assumption that doing good work was enough. I slept less during those weeks, not because of panic, but because my mind stayed alert, cataloging details, replaying conversations, noticing patterns I had ignored before. What I gained didn't feel like strength at the time. It felt like restraint. I learned that power doesn't announce itself. It accumulates. Every email saved, every process documented, every calm response when someone expected emotion became a small weight added to the scale. When leadership stopped listening, records spoke. When promises shifted, timelines held. When confidence filled the room, facts stayed steady. I realized that patience isn't passive. It's preparation without applause. The quiet discipline of showing up, writing things down, and waiting for the right moment cost me comfort, but it gave me leverage I didn't know I was building. If I were telling a friend what mattered most, I'd say this: don't rush to react when you're sidelined. Don't explain yourself to people who already decided. Keep your work clean. Keep your notes cleaner. And remember that being underestimated is only dangerous if you believe it yourself. The outcome didn't come from a single bold move. It came from weeks of consistency that couldn't be argued with once the spotlight shifted. That's the part no one sees until it's too late. How to get started today. Save emails and decisions that affect your role. Write down what you handle that others overlook. Track promises against actual outcomes. Keep your tone professional even when it hurts. Reconnect quietly with people who respect your work. This story is finished. The habits it revealed are not. Stay ready.